What's going on, everybody? Appreciate you tuning in. It is time for our NFL pre-draft coverage. And as promised, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Eli Letterman, now working with ESPN. Eli, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be on with you. We've been on a lot of sidelines, a lot of press boxes together, and now we're podcasting in very different roles than we were in back then.
Not the first time we met on the interweb like this before. It's funny doing it, how small the sports is and kind of the way that you cross paths with people, man. But it's going to be a lot of fun chatting with you today. We have a lot to get into. One of the more kind of fun weeks as a sports fan as you get into the NFL draft. Everyone kind of comes in with that mindset that, maybe we find the diamond in the rough. Maybe this is what's going to change our team. And everyone's got hopeful feelings at this time of year, including a lot of Cardinals fans and ASU fans looking at kind of seeing what's going on with them. But I kind of want to start with just the overlooking, arching parts of the NFL draft right now. Everyone kind of says there's three blue chip players right there at the top. And right now, everyone's expecting Cam Ward to go 1 to the Titans. I don't know. I feel like he hopped around a little bit in college. I see a lot of the wow factor, but I don't know if this is a bit of a reach for him. They did just take a quarterback a couple years back, and I don't know if there's other positions of need. And if you're going to take a quarterback at 1, I almost feel like he's got to be a surefire thing, and I don't know if he is. And I'm curious your thoughts on him and if you think he's worthy of being the first overall pick.
I think, from watching him in college, and that's kind of how I come at all this stuff, right, is I spend the bulk of my year watching them in college, and then NFL time comes around, and I have to start thinking about these guys not as college football players, but how they project to the NFL. And among the quarterbacks in this draft, he, to me, is the most talented, the most projectable toward maybe being a dude in the NFL. But there are question marks. He's not perfect mechanically, all that stuff. He turned the ball over plenty at Miami. But I think if you're looking at a quarterback worth betting on, it's Cam Ward. And we know this. Every single team in the NFL, they are looking for that quarterback on a rookie contract who can come in and be good immediately, and basically make it so that you can spend money elsewhere on your roster. Jaden Daniels being the perfect example with the Commanders last year. So everyone's looking for their Jaden Daniels. Everyone's looking for that young quarterback who you can build around and build around while they're still cheap. And so I think he fits that mold if you're going to bet on anybody in this draft. But there are question marks. But I think he's a guy who really developed in college. I mean, going from Incarnate Word to Washington State and then Miami. I mean, he did it multiple places. He got better everywhere he was, and he won a lot of football games. And so I think, on the whole, he is that guy. But I don't know that, if he goes number 1, that it means the best available guy in this draft has gone number 1.
Yeah, that was my concern is it took him a while to kind of get going. He jumped around a bunch of different schools, but I mean, Jaden Daniels, ASU fans know well that once it does hit and it works, I'm pretty sure Washington's pretty happy that they got him right now. So maybe this will be kind of that version of it. Interesting pick. The none of the blue chips there will be Travis Hunter, who obviously had an awesome kind of career over at Colorado, Blitnikoff winner, and now a guy that won the Heisman, played both ways. He's made it pretty obvious that he wants to keep doing that at the next level. I don't know if a player can make that kind of demand. If you get picked and they say that they're going to make you play one way, I don't know what kind of leverage he has in this kind of debate with the teams and stuff like that. But when you watch him, is that even theoretically something that people can do in modern day NFL, is play both ways? He was playing an insane amount of snaps at Colorado and made it work. So it feels like if there is a guy that could do it, it would be him, but it still feels like it's a different level once you get to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll say this. As a Heisman Trophy voter who voted for Ashton Jeanty, number 1 last year, the most impressive thing I've probably seen in college football in my time covering the sport was Travis Hunter playing something like 2,600 snaps over the last 2 seasons. That's just not done. And that tests everything about the sport in terms of the body and energy and being able to hold up over 4 quarters and a full season and all that. And he did it. And so I think we're going to find out, can it be done in the NFL? Because I don't know really who's tried it at any point in the last 25 years. But I think any team that drafts him would be silly not to try, because he is an elite wide receiver prospect. But the things he can do as a cornerback might be just as good. And so that balance is going to be interesting. Is he a wide receiver first and a situational corner? Maybe that's the solution. I think in the red zone, it could be a really big impact player. But I struggle to see a world ultimately, I mean, we're projecting out here, where he lands on a roster and you're late in the game and you're, leaving one of your better defensive backs on the sideline because he's playing receiver. And that, it's not to discount the challenge of playing defensive back in the NFL and that a guy can just step in and do it. But I think at the very least, whoever drafts him is going to try to get a whole lot out of him. And I think overall, he is a two-way player. He's going to be a fascinating test case once it comes to franchise tag time and all of that, because that is where you're kind of slotting guys based on position and cornerbacks, wide receivers, they make different money. He may really be, if all goes well here with him playing both ways, he's going to be a really fascinating guy who maybe tests kind of the whole collective bargaining model of the NFL.
Interesting. Like the way you describe him, I always looked at him as a better corner than I did as a wideout. He seems to have better natural skills, but the way you describe him, do you feel the same, or do you feel like he's better on the offensive side of the ball?
I think he came into last season surefire like corner. That's what everyone saw him as. And then he was really impressive and got better at wide receiver. I think he's great at both. I think it probably becomes a bit of, in the NFL, figuring out value, how many elite wide receivers are there compared to, cornerbacks. If he's not an elite cornerback, he may become one. But can you find guys to play that spot while getting the most out of him as a receiver? I think he could truly play either position and potentially have, an all-pro career. But it may come down to playing him at wide receiver allows you to make him a two-way guy, whereas the other way around might make that a little more difficult.
As far as the guy throwing the ball, Shedeur, on all of these mock drafts, if there's a guy that looks like he's projected to be sliding, it keeps being him, and now he's down to around the 9-10 range. People are talking about him possibly going to the Saints there. Do you think that's fair? I mean, there was a time when people thought he might be the first overall pick, that he was challenging with Cam, but is there something that's going on with this tape? Have you seen something that just makes you feel like it maybe won't translate to the NFL as well?
I mean, I don't think it's anything we didn't see last year. I mean, he was great in a lot of ways, but he's not exceptionally athletic. Like we talk about the modern NFL quarterback, you got to be able to move. I think there's holes in his game that probably rightly have him dropping to some degree. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about what he's been like in interviews, things like that. I don't buy into it a whole lot, but overall, the fact is he's sliding. He's not, as far as we know, going to jump Cam Ward. And so then it'll be interesting. I think we've seen over the years, quarterbacks can slide pretty quickly when teams, it is as much about the prospect as it is sort of the dynamics of the draft. And if he slides past one spot, could he slide big? But someone's going to take him. Someone's going to take a shot on him, and he's going to get a chance to prove, all the doubters who, like myself, we don't see the athleticism you'd think he'd need or doesn't think he's accurate enough to do it in the NFL. He's going to get his shot somewhere. And perhaps, would he be better off falling and landing with a team that's a bit more complete than, say, the New York Giants? Like that, they could take him early on, but then it's all about your landing spot. And so you wonder perhaps if sliding will ultimately be the best thing for him.
What do you think of Colorado retiring his number?
I was something else. Travis probably, I don't know. There's no such thing as earning it, but when you look around college football and Tim Tebow's number is not retired. I don't think Baker Mayfield's number is retired in Norman. It was interesting, but I don't know. I think the situation's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I could see the argument for Travis Hunter with what he did and winning the Heisman and everything, even though like Colorado's history in football is there. Granted, it's been slim the last 20 years or so, but there is a rich history back there where there's a lot of guys that were probably waiting for that kind of honor, and that got kind of passed up a little bit. But now they're here, no there, I guess. So, we'll see what Coach Sanders has to say, kind of moving on with that. But speaking, you mentioned it earlier, you voted for Ashton Jeanty for a Heisman this past year. Just outrageous season for Boise State, a guy that explosive, could do it all on offense, and one of the more dynamic players in recent history, and calls up on to be at a Boise State and to stay there when he had opportunities to kind of jump to bigger conferences, I think speaks a lot about kind of the character and the kind of the player that he is. A lot of boards have him now listed pretty high. I mean, some people talk about him possibly going 3 or 4, somewhere around there. The latest mock draft that was out had him going 6. Are you concerned at all about his size? Are you concerned? Are there pieces of him that maybe get you a little bit? I'm not sure if this is going to be the same guy once you get to the NFL and you have bigger, faster, stronger guys out there with him.
I mean, there's reason for concerns. We don't look typically at, right, like sub 6 foot running backs and say, oh yeah, that he's locked on to be a long time NFL star. We also, when maybe recent draft records would tell differently, but when's the last time, a team has gone and drafted a running back that high, or at least we've been trending away from those big time first round running backs as the positions become devalued across the sport. But I think he's worth it. And I think if we do see someone go after him in those first 10 picks, that's going to tell you all you need to know about what NFL teams think about his size and his potential, because he was a guy at Boise State that you could build. They built an entire offense around him. He wasn't just a goal line back. He wasn't a feature back who was productive. Everything in that offense ran around Ashton Jeanty. And I think his durability, his ability to carry as often as he did and really remain productive, that's all going to, that should all translate. We'll see bigger, faster, stronger. You're right. It won't be all Mountain West opponents. He looked pretty good in those playoff games when teams really sold out to stop him. And
yeah,
I think, if you're an NFL offense, you're saying, well, we've got more than just Ashton Jeanty. If we can plug him into our offense, and you can't just, pack the box on him, he can be a pretty effective guy.
Yeah, to his credit, too. I mean, early season as it was, he still looked good against Oregon. Like, he did have a couple games against some good competition, and he was still able to produce. And even for his size, he was a 3-down back. And I think that says a lot, too, about his versatility and everything that he's able to do. So there's a lot of upside there. There's a lot of reasons to like him. There's a couple of things that I don't know. Like, I've seen it before, and it gets a little concerning when you get up against guys that are not everyone's going to be Mountain West size anymore once you go into the NFL like that.
Sure.
Another running back that people around Phoenix obviously really interested in, Cam Skattebo, had just a meteoric everyone around there knew about him last year, but I don't know if he had the national attention that he garnered this year. It helps when you have a run like the Sun Devils had, but he was awesome kind of throughout the year, winning the Big 12 championship, and then in the playoff game showed he's the first player to win the player of the game on a losing team when they took on Texas. But there's still so many questions on all these draft boards. I've seen him go anywhere from late first round all the way to mid fourth round, fifth round, and saying that he's a great college football player that's not going to translate on his skill set. I don't know. He did everything, it felt like, for the Sun Devils, and he was impossible to tackle, and he just showed that the versatility. I feel like he's one of those guys that maybe you're not exactly sure where you put him or how you use him, but he's a guy that's going to find a way onto a football field. When you evaluate him, when you look at him now, like, where do you think he is the right spot for him to get drafted? Where should fans kind of expect his name to come off the board?
Well, his greatest asset, which might be his flexibility and the fact that he just does seem like a guy who will succeed somewhere and be effective somewhere. But the fact that we don't know if he's going to be an every down back or more of a situational weapon, that's probably why you're seeing anything from a first round grade to, day 2 and so on from there. But you're right. He did it all at Arizona State. He was impossible to tackle. He made catches out of the backfield. They used him. We talk about Ashton Jeanty being what the offense was built around. He was that guy for Arizona State for a lot of the season. And so that's probably a big piece of valuing him and seeing, is he a first round guy or third round guy? But to me, football players are football players, and productive football players tend to find ways to produce places. And so I'd think of him as a guy wherever he lands and however early he goes as someone who can probably carve a role somewhere. And it's why you see him linked with, the Patriots, the Raiders, the Chiefs, falling in, especially the Chiefs. They would find a way to make use of him. There's no doubt about that. And I think there's going to be other offenses wherever he lands where he can carve a role, whether that's as, a more consistent, 3-down back or a pass catcher out of the backfield. He's going to find a way.
Chiefs would be super fun watching that happen. And then also, like you talk about the Patriots, like he fits that mold of the Danny Woodhead, the guys that they've had that are just really good football players that can do a little bit of everything. Because I could see that being, I think if he finds the right spot, he's a guy that sticks and really does a lot of good things for a team. So I like that as not necessarily how high he gets drafted, but if he could find the right place for him and the right system, he's going to make somebody happy if he does get picked there, the right kind of opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about the Cardinals. Obviously, the team that everyone around here is really kind of interested in. They got the 16th pick in the draft. They're stuck in this, not sure if they're rebuilding, kind of the forever winning 7 games, somewhere around there. And that's how you end up with the 16th pick. But there's a lot of needs. And the one that really kind of reared his head throughout the year was on both lines, but really kind of the defensive line. How do you feel about the D-line kind of prospects in this draft? And are there any names that are sitting around there that might be available around that 16th pick that you think would be a good one for them?
Yeah, they're in that 16 range, which means like you're missing out probably in terms of like drafting best available on some of those. Just if they're there, we got to take them. There's maybe 12 of those guys in this draft. They're at 16. They probably miss out on them if they don't move around. But I think to address that issue, which I think is kind of their central problem from a year ago, which was that defensive line, there's options there. Walter Nolan, in college was a do-it-all elite defensive tackle. I think he's going to come to the NFL and probably do pretty similarly. He's just been great ever since he got to Texas A&M and then moved on to Ole Miss. I think that would be a really interesting pick. People have talked about Shamar Stewart, a former teammate of his at A&M. I'm a little less convinced of him, but the guy I'm most excited about probably because he rose throughout the year last fall and then just dominated the Senior Bowl is Mike Green from Marshall. Led the nation in sacks, 17 sacks on the year, and it was just dominant. When you think about what the Cardinals have done this offseason, you go sign Josh Sweat, you still need someone opposite him, and Mike Green might be able to slot in as that guy. And with 2 offseason moves, you've solved the edge of your defense at a position and in a position group that was a problem a year ago.
Yeah, people really started to like him once the tape looked good, but then when they saw the measurables and everything, he really started popping and being a name that I think that's when he really started flying up a lot of the boards that I saw. So that would be a great fit too. They obviously got some veteran leadership there on the D line now as well. So having a new young guy in that group, I think I would go that route, but apparently that's not necessarily where they could be looking. Mel Kiper on his last 2 mock drafts have them looking at a corner, which they need, but I feel like in the first round, there's bigger needs that they need to have. The 2 names that he keeps passing around is Jedi Barron and looking at Will Johnson also. Again, like they could use a corner. I just feel like there's much bigger needs that they have at 16 that they need to address. Is that just a situation where these guys are that talented that if they're on the board, you got to grab them? Or am I missing something? Because I don't think, even if they're that good, I just feel like there's other things that they need to address in that kind of spot right there.
Yeah, I mean, from a mock draft standpoint, I guess like in those mock drafts, Mel had him still on the board at 16. At that point, I said a couple minutes ago that the Cardinals might miss out on those, 12 best available guys, that if they're on the board, they won't get them at 16. I think Will Johnson and Jedi Barron are in that group. So if they're hanging around at 16, maybe that's a case where, depending on how the Cardinals have evaluated and scouted, they just say, we can't not take one of these guys. And that would make sense in the vein that those are 2 of the best defenders in this whole draft. Jedi Barron went from probably a kind of a day 2 pick going into last season to just exploding on a defense that helped get Texas to the college football playoff and won the Thorpe Award. He's the real deal, and a guy that, just about any defense would probably love to add. Will Johnson didn't play a whole lot last year, had a toe injury, but was effective when he played. And again, another one who's in college football been one of the best defensive backs of the past few years. And so if they're hanging around and there's, no need there for the Cardinals, I could see it happening, but I'd be surprised, certainly if those 2 guys are off the board, if they went cornerback at that spot.
Be really curious to see how Cardinals fans that are from Phoenix feel about them grabbing a Texas player right there. Still some sour feelings about the way that game finished right there, and kind of deservingly so. But if they do end up going corner, or if they go look somewhere else there in the first round, I mean, they're going to have to get some D-line help, and really they're going to have to get some O-line help here later on in the draft as well. Is there a lot of depth, do you feel like, in those positions? Could they afford to grab a corner early and then just kind of find some talented guys later on in the draft? Is that one of the positions that is any depth in this draft?
I mean, it gets dangerous, the further down you go, because there's depth there, and there's always, gems to be found among the offensive and defensive linemen, and that's where teams, you'll see, they reach for a guy or they get a guy late that they love. But, if it's really the spot they have to address, that edge spot is what they have to address. Mike Green's probably your best bet going doing that in the first round. But past there, Deion Walker, defensive tackle from Kentucky, seems like a guy who could be hanging around in those, on either second round or day 2, 3. Shamar James from Florida, linebacker. We'll see kind of where he plays at the next level, but he could be a combo kind of edge, depending on how they decided to use him. And Emory Jones, like if they want to go get, an offensive guard, they have a need at that position, LSU guy. Those feel like a couple of the names, all coming from the SEC. There is talent in the SEC and well beyond those, all SEC lists and all that. And those are guys who I think would project as potential guys to both be hanging around, but also be true fits for what the Cardinals need.
So I don't think they grab a quarterback early, but this is going to be an interesting draft and speak about kind of how they feel the future of that quarterback room. Just speaking on behalf of the fan base, it feels like they are still very split on where they are with Kyler Murray right now. Like there's been some good highs. They're incredible highlight reel, and yet there's this kind of belief that maybe he's not worth either the full-on paycheck, the amount of money that you're paying for a starting quarterback, or he's not a guy that can kind of get you over the hump. They've had a lot of years of just being about 500 with him, and there's a growing portion of the fan base that feels like maybe we need to move off this guy and press the full reboot button. Is there anyone in that maybe day 3 range that you can just draft and take a flyer on, then you feel like maybe this guy kind of produces into some? And I should say, we both have a little bit of connection in covering OU, so we say this all with full-on respect to Murray and all the Sooner fans out there, but does a Kyle McCord maybe in like that 4th round draft, is that something that they should maybe explore if he's there? We both got to see Dillon Gabriel up close for a long time. A lot of mock drafts have him being around, late 5th, 6th round pick. Is that something that they should take a flyer? If either of those guys are around, or are there any other names that maybe later on in day 3 that if they were looking at adding a younger guy to just take a chance on that you like?
Well, it's the conundrum of the spot they find themselves in, right? Because in one school of thought, it's why waste a draft pick on a quarterback who is not going to have an impact on your roster this coming year, maybe even the year after, and go get a guy who can help you compete with Kyler Murray. But if you're already thinking beyond then, at that point, maybe they should be trading up and going for Cam Ward or taking Shedeur at 16 if he falls. But, the point being that they're probably in that spot. I don't imagine, unless we see a real big surprise this week, that they're going to be, offloading Kyler and rebooting. So it's worthwhile at least maybe taking a flyer on one of these guys. But again, you got to weigh that against, what could you get there that could help your team now at another spot of need. But Dillon Gabriel should be there toward the end. He's not we talk about size with that's Ashton Jeanty and whether that's concerned. Dillon Gabriel, there's a reason that he, among the reasons he didn't leave college early was that I don't think he's ever really been viewed as a legit NFL quarterback prospect. Someone like Will Howard is a winner. Same with Dillon Gabriel. Kyle McCord, Riley Leonard, all guys who have shown it in college and who, if the Cardinals have kind of made a scout on any one of them and said, we like this guy maybe better than some other teams, and we feel like we get him in our organization and build him, we can get something out of. I think that's really intriguing. I think certainly, McCord, people look at his arm and what he did at Syracuse last year. If we're kind of viewing quarterbacks, especially at this part of the draft, as projects, and that what they did in college is not necessarily indicative of all an NFL team might see them as capable of being, that's where it gets interesting. So Riley Leonard, he can move well. I don't know if he quite has the arm for the NFL. McCord, some holes in his game, but a huge arm and threw for a ton of yards a year ago. Maybe there's a guy in there that they look at and say, we see something there. We want to develop him. If we can fix X, Y, Z about him, he could be a future NFL quarterback. Maybe that's there, and that would be a really interesting take if they jumped on one of those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about the Sun Devils while I got you here. Jump back into the college football realm. It's such a weird time covering college football teams. It's unlike anything it's changed so much in the last 3 years alone from what building programs meant to the kind of the plan that you had back then versus now. That being said, in a small amount of time, Kenny Dillingham has had so much success at ASU as he's come there and led them to the college football playoffs this year. But as is the way with college football now, you lose a lot of your team to the portal. You lose a lot of the guys kind of just reshuffling. They have a bunch of guys that they go in the portal and get 12 different commits. They're all 3 stars right now. They're ranked 52nd on the latest 24/7 kind of having them a recruiting class. When you look at kind of the group that they brought in, how do you feel about kind of this new reloaded look of ASU? Do you feel like there's any chance that they can kind of repeat some of the magic that they were able to capture this past year? Or are they tempted to be more of the TCU that flash in the pan that then the next year they kind of fall off the mat a little bit?
I'm tempted to say, despite how big of a loss I think Cam Scatterbo is, that they have what they need to sort of return and reload. Bring back 79% of the roster. That's huge. They did not see a mass exodus after last year. They lost some key pieces, but the bulk of last year's team is coming back. And you add someone like Kanye Udo at running back, who proved it at Army in a really fascinating offense. I think his fit, and we'll probably talk about him in a second, but his fit in this offense and how maybe they rework things around everyone is a fascinating element here. But they went big there. They had to address things at cornerback and went out and got Nyland Green and Adrian Wilson. That was kind of one of the holes for them last year, was that pass defense. So if they can tighten things up there and figure out a way to sort of recalibrate their offense around, Sam Leavitt, who I think comes into this year as a Heisman Trophy candidate at ASU, and figure out their new balance without Cam Scatterbo, they have every reason to at least go into the season feeling like they're once again, a Big 12 contender and a team that can get into the playoff.
So I really liked Kyson Brown last year, and I felt like when you got Cam, like, you're going to give him the ball as much as possible, obviously, with Scatterbo out there. But when he came in, as far as just a downhill runner, like, he really had a lot of strength, and it wasn't so much wiggle. It was just north and south and kind of just go. But obviously, you go out and get Kanye, and he did so much for Army, but then I also look at it and I'm like, it's Army. Like, if you're a running back on Army, I would expect you to have pretty decent numbers by the end of the season. He did have 1,100 yards, but I guess when you measure kind of what they got, it seems like they have good depth in the running back room, but do you feel like this is going to be a situation where they going back and forth? Do they showcase a lot of the guys, or do you feel like they can, either of those guys have the ability to be maybe not what Cam Scatterbo did as far as Philly, but being the guy that is your kind of featured back?
I think there's room for both of them, and that's the good news for Arizona State, is that, a year ago, it was kind of all Cam Scatterbo, all things considered. Carried the ball 293 times, did it all, could do it all. He, passing game, running the ball, all that. And I don't know that they have a guy who can do that again, but I think they have two who can fill that spot, because Kanye Udo came from a run-heavy offense, but a lot of that, Bryson Daly, the quarterback, was a huge piece of that run game. And so Kanye Udo, in his last 2 seasons, 278 carries. Cam Scatterbo last fall, 293. So can he adjust to that workload? Or better put, are they going to force him to take on that workload? I think not. I think Kanye Udo becomes your every down running back, but I think Kyson Brown has a real role here, both as a guy who can move the ball. He averaged something like 4.8 yards per carry a year ago in his limited reps, but he's going to give you a dimension in the passing game that I don't think Kanye Udo, at least to this point, and maybe that's the other piece, qualifier with Army, how many times do you get to catch the ball in the backfield? But I think there's room for both of them, particularly an offense that I think is going to have to move away from its reliance on the running back position. They're going to be important. They're going to be a huge piece of it, but without Cam Scatterbo, with Sam Leavitt presumably taking another step this year and some reinforcement in the passing game, I think they'll need less from their backfield, and they'll find everything they need potentially between those two guys.
That's what you said a second ago was a strong statement about Sam Leavitt being a Heisman potential candidate type player this year. He obviously had a very, very strong season, and it was overshadowed a little bit because of everything that Scatterbo was doing. I guess my question would be, do you feel like he was a benefactor of how much attention people had to give to Scatterbo, and then now that he's expected to be kind of the 1A guy of that offense, have you seen enough that you feel like he's able to do that? Because there's a lot of rankings out there that have him as a top 5 quarterback returning in college football next year. And kind of that's now the expectation is for him to be the guy for this team. I don't know if he was so much. It's a lot easier to find open guys when you have all one-on-one coverage on the outside, because everybody has their eyes on the backfield and watching where Cam was going. And he's not going to probably see as easy of routes, as easy as coverage this year without Cam back there.
No, it's again, the dynamic of this offense is going to have to change, and it will be on his shoulders. So we're going to find out probably pretty quickly. Was he, a quarterback who functioned well around everything around him, or can he be a guy? And that's what this season's going to be all about. But I think the fact that he can do it all, he can move, he's got a huge arm, and he's in an offense that has been really exciting. I mean, Kenny Dillingham and this staff, they know what they're doing in terms of building an offense. And I think it's as much a test for Sam Levitt, and it will be, as it is this coaching staff of, can they rework this offense? You don't have Cam Scatterbo anymore. Can you adjust the balance of this offense? And I think that's where Sam Levitt's going to come in. And I think his dual threat ability is going to be huge. And I think they're going to find ways to make him successful. And if things go well and, they can follow up last season with another, playoff contending campaign, he'll be right there at the end of it as one of the top quarterbacks in college football.
Have you seen anything out of the Big 12 to make you feel like it bounces back next year, or is it taking another where it was kind of a step back kind of in comparison to the rest of the Power Fours?
I think, and I've said this ever since really like the realignment began, that the Big 12 is always going to be the most fun conference because you just can't predict anything within it. But there's a ton of, potential there. You look across the conference, Texas Tech has spent more than anybody this offseason, and they feel like in Lubbock they have the best roster in college football. I'm not so sure, but we're going to find out. Kansas State brings back a lot of talent on offense. Avery Johnson, maybe in a not quite the same circumstances, but a similar spot to Sam Levitt of, all right, we've seen a little bit, but what's that jump going to look like? I think there's a lot of teams around the conference, BYU, TCU, Oklahoma State. We know how they can yo-yo from year to year. I think there's a lot of potential in the conference, and it's what makes it so much fun and makes it so unpredictable week to week. But I would think Arizona State falls, pretty firmly atop that group of schools that you'd look at going into this coming season and saying they should be, considered favorites to contend for the conference and in turn be right there in the playoff.
Eli, where do people go if they want to kind of follow you in your work and your coverage?
Head over to ESPN.com and follow all the good work of the college football team that I work with there. All my stuff is over at ESPN.com. You can find me on Twitter at @ByEliLetterman and on Instagram at ESPN Letterman for all the stuff I've got going on across a whole lot of different sports and things across college football.
All right, man. I'm excited for the next few days. Like I said, it's going to be fun for sports fans. It's going to be fun for ASUs just to see kind of where Cam goes and kind of follow his journey. And like I said, at this point of the year, everyone feels like their team got a chance at turning things around. We see it every year in the NFL that teams that kind of struggle the next year bounce back. So we'll see what happens. I really appreciate your time, man. It's been fun getting a chance to talk with you, and catch you down the road a little bit.
Appreciate you having me.